Missing for 3 days in the desert, the heroes who found her weren't human. The Mojave does not forgive. Each hour steals water, breath, and hope. When 7-year-old Lily Morgan vanished from a family campsite, her parents prayed for a miracle. Deputies searched, helicopters circled, posters went up in gas stations. But time in the desert doesn't wait. 3 days later, when hope was nearly gone, salvation appeared in the most unexpected form. From the wasteland came 2 German shepherds. One an aging police canine presumed dead for years, the other a half-wild stray who had never known kindness. Together, they stumbled across the frail child, sunburned and bound to a thorn shrub. She should not have lived. And yet, she whispered one broken word when she saw them: help. What happened next defied explanation. One dog gnawed at the cruel nylon ropes, reopening an old wound in his jaw. The other vanished into the scrub and returned with cactus pulp to keep her alive. 2 creatures who owed humanity nothing, yet gave everything. This isn't just a rescue story. It's about loyalty, second chances, and the kind of bond you can't explain, only feel. The Mojave Desert never gave mercy. By mid-afternoon, the sun blazed so fiercely that the sand seemed to breathe fire. Heat shimmered across the dunes in waves, bending the horizon into illusions. Phantom pools of water, fleeting shapes that vanished the closer one walked toward them. The air itself felt heavy, each breath thick and searing, as if the sky had descended to press its furnace upon the earth. Out here, silence was not peace, but punishment. Even the wind moved sluggishly, dragging dust in tired swirls that scoured stone and skin alike. And still, through this punishing landscape, 2 figures moved. Not men, not machines, but shadows of fur and muscle shaped by survival. Kaiser walked first. He carried the desert in his body, the way scars carried memory, etched deep, unforgotten. His coat, once a sharp black and tan, had dulled under the sun to silvered edges. A notch was torn into his left ear, a permanent testament to a battle no human had witnessed. His gait was steady but not effortless. Every step was measured, cautious, as though the desert demanded payment for crossing its floor. His amber eyes cut across the barren land with the discipline of an old soldier who had learned that recklessness out here meant death. 3 years had passed since anyone had called his name. To most, he was gone, lost to a flash flood, swept into oblivion. Yet here he was, not gone, but transformed. Where once he had been a badge-bearing guardian, now he was something else entirely. Part ghost, part wolf, part relic of loyalty, with nowhere left to anchor. At his flank, Blitz. The younger shepherd moved with a starkly different rhythm. His paws barely touched the sand before springing forward again, sending small bursts of dust scattering. His ears twitched constantly, radar dishes for every rustle and whisper of the desert. Where Kaiser trod in silence, Blitz skittered with bursts of energy, sometimes leaping onto rock ledges, only to dash down again, testing the ground as if daring it to give way. His coat was darker, unmarred by years of discipline, though across his flank lay faint scars, the kind left by hunger, by human cruelty, by nights when survival meant running from the very hands that once claimed to own him. They were an unlikely pair. The old dog of duty, scarred and silent, and the restless youth who had never known a master's steady hand. They had not chosen each other through affection or command. Their companionship was a quieter thing, born of long nights under cold stars, of sharing water when none was left, of guarding each other's flank when coyotes circled the dark. Survival had its own language, and both spoke it fluently. The desert stretched endlessly around them. Miles of rock broken by spindly shrubs, bones of birds bleached white by the sun, lay half buried in sand, mute reminders of what waited for the careless. Kaiser moved with his head low, not sniffing for food but watching for signs. A flicker of lizard movement, the faint shimmer of heat rising differently off stone, where water might hide in its shadow. He had learned these things not from books or men, but from hunger itself. Blitz darted ahead, vanishing for moments behind a ridge, then reappearing with his tongue lolling. Once he lunged at a grasshopper that leapt in the heat, snapping at it before losing interest. He turned back to check on Kaiser, a flick of his ears and a wag of his tail betraying his urge to play, to push forward faster. But something in the elder shepherd's steady, commanding presence anchored him. Even in silence, Blitz obeyed a rhythm he didn't fully understand. Slow, measured, relentless. Above, a hawk circled, casting its shadow across the sand like a blade. Blitz barked once, sharp and quick, before Kaiser's low rumble silenced him. In the desert, noise was risk. Noise carried farther than scent. And scent, Kaiser knew, told truths the eyes often missed. The heat made the world shimmer, edges of stone blurring into haze. Kaiser paused on a rise of sun-bleached rock. From here, the land stretched in all directions, with no promise, no mercy. His chest rose and fell slowly, his body conserving energy with the precision of long practice. Blitz bounded up beside him, panting hard, ears twitching, at a faint buzz of insects near a cactus bloom. The younger dog pressed his shoulder lightly against Kaiser's flank. It was not dependence so much as reassurance, as if to say, "We are still two, not one, not alone." For a long moment, nothing moved but the heat. Then Kaiser's head lifted. His nostrils flared, drawing in air slow and deep. He froze, his amber gaze narrowing at something far beyond sight. Blitz tilted his head, watching, then copied him, snout twitching at the current. At first, the desert carried only dust, cactus, and the faint musk of coyotes long gone. But under that, thin, fragile, almost drowned by sun, came something else, human. Kaiser stiffened. It was not the smell of hunters or hikers passing through with canteens. This was raw, tinged with sweat, blood, and fear. It pulled at something buried in him, an old memory of work, of training, of search. His tail stiffened, not wagging but pointing, as if the air itself were a trail to follow. Blitz let out a low, uncertain whine, tail flicking. He caught the scent too, but didn't understand its meaning. His body jittered with excitement, half ready to bolt toward it, half hesitant from Kaiser's stillness. The old shepherd glanced at him, a brief but commanding look. Blitz sank slightly, ears folding back. Instinct alone told him, "Wait. Follow." The desert wind shifted. The scent grew clearer. It was not food. It was not prey. It was fragile and urgent, like a candle about to die in the dark. Kaiser began to move, his pace no longer meandering but deliberate, his paws carving a line down the ridge. Blitz bounded after him, unable to contain a burst of energy, his paws kicking up dust. He darted too quickly at first, his excitement nearly betraying their stealth, but Kaiser's low growl pulled him back into rhythm. Side by side, their bodies aligned in a silent march. The silence of the Mojave pressed in heavier now, as though it too listened. Each step took them closer to something unseen but undeniable. The scent thickened, sharpened with the salt of tears. The faint trace of nylon rope rubbed raw against skin. Then, fainter than the wind itself, came a sound. Not the screech of hawks or the hiss of sand. A whimper, so small, it could have been mistaken for the sigh of the desert shifting in heat. But Kaiser heard it. Blitz's ears shot up, his entire frame snapping to attention. For a moment they stood frozen, the old shepherd with muscles coiled, the young one quivering with restless anticipation. The sound came again, a thread of breath, a broken cry. Kaiser's heart, hardened by years of solitude, gave a single jolt. The desert had given him nothing but emptiness for 3 long years, and yet here, against all odds, something living called out. Blitz yipped softly, unable to contain the tremor of urgency in his chest. Kaiser silenced him with a low glance, then turned his gaze toward the sound. The hunt was over. The mission had begun. The Mojave carried secrets in its breath. On some days, it was nothing but dust and heat, the air stripped clean by the sun until even scent seemed to burn away. But that afternoon, as Kaiser and Blitz pressed deeper into the rock-strewn flats, the desert whispered something different. Kaiser caught it first. He froze mid-step, body tightening as though some invisible wire had pulled him still. His nostrils flared, drinking in air as old instincts reawakened. Instincts forged long before the desert had claimed him. It wasn't prey, not the musk of jackrabbit nor the oily tang of coyote. This was heavier, saltier, laced with the unmistakable thread of human. And not the clean human scent of hikers with sunscreen or rangers with leather boots. No, this was raw. Sweat mixed with fear, the faint iron of blood. And something fainter still, fragile enough to shatter if ignored. The smell of despair. Blitz noticed the change in Kaiser before he smelled it himself. The young shepherd skidded to a halt, sand spraying from under his paws, ears pricking at attention. His tongue lolled, panting from his restless sprint. But the older dog's rigid posture silenced his puppy-like energy. Blitz lowered his head and sniffed. The first intake brought confusion, dust, cactus bloom, the dryness of baked earth. Then, like a thread pulled from a tangled rope, the human note slipped in. Blitz jerked his head up, eyes wide. He let out a sharp bark, quick and high-pitched, excitement crackling through him like lightning. His tail whipped the air in a blur, but Kaiser's deep growl cut the desert stillness, a warning rooted in command. Blitz's ears flattened. He crouched low, body trembling, fighting his own eagerness. Stealth. The desert demanded it. Kaiser moved again, each pawfall deliberate, pressing into the sand without sound. His eyes narrowed against the glare, scanning ridges and shrubs for movement. Blitz shadowed him now, his steps clumsy in contrast but obedient, his body humming with pent-up energy. The scent grew sharper as they descended a low ridge. The wind shifted, curling between jagged rocks, carrying with it the faint thread of rope fibers rubbed raw against flesh. Kaiser's ears twitched. He had known this smell once, years ago, when nylon and human sweat mingled during rescue missions. But never had it carried such desperation. The old shepherd paused again, nose lifted. Blitz pawed at the ground impatiently, a small whine squeezing past his throat. He could smell it too now, stronger with every step, and the not knowing burned him. He darted forward a few paces, tail stiff, before catching Kaiser's low rumble and circling back. His youth fought against discipline, but something in him trusted the elder's restraint. The silence deepened. No hawks cried overhead now. Even the wind seemed to hold itself back, as though the desert was waiting. And then it came. A sound so fragile, it could have been mistaken for the sigh of shifting sand. Kaiser's ears pricked forward. Blitz's entire body jolted, his head snapping in the same direction. They waited, bodies taut, every nerve straining. The sound drifted again, a whimper, barely more than a breath. Blitz whined in response, low and urgent, tail wagging as though begging to run toward it. He pawed at the earth, restless, his body vibrating with a need to break into a sprint. Kaiser held still, his gaze locked on the horizon. His heart thudded with something he hadn't felt in years, the certainty of a mission. For 3 long years, the desert had been nothing but survival. Find shade, find water, outlast the sun. But this was purpose. The cry was too faint for chance. It was not prey, not trick, but a living human soul, young and fragile, tethered to life by threads thinner than the desert wind. Kaiser began forward, no hesitation in his stride now. His paws dug into sand and stone, leaving prints that disappeared as the wind brushed over them. Blitz bounded ahead, his joy nearly betraying him, ears flapping, paws too loud. Kaiser's bark, sharp and commanding, reeled him back into line. Blitz slowed, matching stride, chest heaving with contained excitement. The scent thickened as they pushed through a stretch of thorny brush. Blitz sneezed, pawing at his snout, but Kaiser pressed on. His eyes scanned every shadow, every twisted shrub, until at last the air grew heavy with certainty. It was here, somewhere close. Blitz's ears shot up again. His body stiffened, and he gave a sharp glance toward a cluster of low desert shrubs half buried in sand. His tail wagged once, uncertain but hopeful. Kaiser followed his gaze. Another sound reached them, clearer now. A faint, broken cry, like glass cracking under weight. Kaiser's chest tightened. It was the voice of a child. Blitz yelped, his excitement breaking free in a quick bark before Kaiser silenced him again. But there was no undoing the truth. The cry had pierced the desert silence, undeniable now. They crept closer. The shrubs ahead shivered with a wind that carried no mercy. Behind them, hidden in shadow, lay the source of the scent, the voice, the fragile tether. Kaiser's pause slowed as instinct surged through him. Police dog, rescuer, guardian. His every sense sharpened to a knife's edge. Blitz crouched beside him, eyes wide, ears quivering. The whimper came again. A child's plea, thin and cracked, carried away almost instantly by the desert wind. And in that moment, Kaiser knew. This was no accident, no coincidence. The desert had not led him astray. Something, or someone, was waiting. The next step would reveal it. The shrubs were brittle things, gnarled, thorny skeletons clinging to the desert floor as if the wind itself might tear them loose. From a distance, they looked like nothing more than another cluster of sun-bleached obstacles in a land that devoured the living. But as Kaiser drew closer, the truth emerged. A small body leaned against the thorns, limp and weightless, as though the desert had already begun claiming her as its own. Rope bound her wrists tight against the twisted trunk, fibers biting so deep the skin had darkened, raw and crusted with dried blood. Her hair, once golden, was matted with dust. Her cheeks were blistered red, lips cracked open, every breath scraping like sandpaper. Kaiser stopped. The world fell into silence around him. No hawks, no wind, no restless shifting of Blitz's paws, just the sound of a child's shallow rattling inhale. For 3 years he had lived as a ghost, stripped of duty, stripped of command. But in that instant, something ancient and unbroken within him surged awake. He was no longer Kaiser the Wanderer, Kaiser the Survivor. He was a canine again. His body lowered instinctively, muscles coiling, head tilted forward in the stance of approach. Not prey, not threat, rescue. He advanced step by deliberate step, each paw silent on the sand, his eyes locked on the fragile shape tethered to the thorn. Blitz couldn't hold still. The young shepherd darted sideways, circling the girl in wide arcs, his whines rising and falling like notes of a song too urgent to contain. He pawed at the earth, tail stiff, ears flat, unable to understand why Kaiser moved so slowly when everything in Blitz screamed for speed, for action. The girl stirred. Her eyelids fluttered like torn cloth in the wind, struggling to lift against the weight of exhaustion. At last, 2 glassy blue eyes appeared, cloudy with pain, yet startlingly alive. She blinked once, twice, struggling to focus on the shapes before her. What she saw was not a coyote, not a scavenger circling her end. She saw 2 shepherds, one silvered and scarred, one dark and restless, framed against the blaze of desert light. Her lips parted, a sound scraping free, no louder than a moth's wing against glass. "You're good." The words trembled into the air, barely formed, yet sharp enough to cut through the desert silence. Kaiser paused at the whisper. His ears flicked forward, his amber eyes softening. The recognition in her voice, faint as it was, carried the same weight as a command. This was no lost hiker, no accident. This was a child in need, and she had chosen to see him not as beast, but as protector. He closed the remaining distance and lowered his head toward her hand, bound and trembling against the thorn. His nose brushed lightly against her skin, warm breath ghosting over the rope. She didn't flinch. Instead, her fingers twitched faintly, a spark of movement so small it might have been mistaken for the wind. But Kaiser felt it. A pulse. Life. Fragile, but present. Blitz whined louder, circling back to the girl's side, tail swiping the air in frantic arcs. He nosed at the sand near her feet, pawing as though he might dig her free himself. His young heart couldn't contain the urgency, the need to do something, anything to stop this stillness that felt too close to the final silence. The girl's chest rose again, shallow and rasping, her breath wheezing with the harsh whistle of dust and illness. She tried to lift her head, but failed, her chin falling back against her chest. Still, her eyes stayed fixed on Kaiser, a faint shimmer of tears gathering in their corners. Not fear, not terror, trust. Kaiser pressed his forehead lightly against her bound wrist. The old fractured tooth in his jaw ached as he tested the rope with a tentative bite, but he stopped short. Not yet. She was too weak, her skin too raw. Instinct told him to wait, to steady her with his presence first. He lifted his gaze, scanning the horizon. The desert stretched empty, but the air carried traces of more than just the girl. Faint footprints, long scuffed by wind, the stink of man left behind. Whoever had tied her here had done so with cruel deliberation, counting on the desert to finish the work. Blitz growled softly, hackles lifting as though he, too, sensed the echo of danger. He darted closer to the girl, pawing gently at her leg, his dark eyes wide and pleading. She stirred faintly, her lips working around a single, broken word. "Help!" The sound was nothing more than a ragged breath, but it ignited something in both shepherds. Blitz barked once, sharp and urgent, before pressing his body low beside her, tail thumping the sand. Kaiser lowered himself fully now, lying close enough that his warmth touched her arm. His eyes locked on hers, steady and unyielding. He would not leave. Not now. Not ever. The desert wind shifted again, dragging grit across their faces. The girl's eyes fluttered closed, her breath rattling unevenly. Blitz whined frantically, licking at her arm, nudging her with his snout. Kaiser stayed still, his body a shield, his gaze scanning the horizon for threats. Somewhere deep inside, buried beneath years of wandering, his instincts began to weave themselves back together. The training. The memory of Daniel Hayes's voice, the commands, the missions. All of it stirred within him, like embers catching flame. He was not just a survivor anymore. He was a guardian reborn, and the mission had a name. Lily Morgan. Long before the Mojave stripped him to scar and instinct, Kaiser had lived another life, one of commands, partners, and purpose. The desert had tried to grind those years into dust, but memory clung stubbornly, surfacing now in flashes as he pressed his body against the fragile child. The scent of fear, the rope cutting into skin, it pulled him backward, into the life he once knew, when every mission had a name, and every day carried meaning. Back then, Kaiser had belonged to one man, Deputy Daniel Hayes. Hayes was no stranger to loss. His wife had died too young, her absence carving a silence through his home that no badge could soften. He was left with a teenage daughter who spent more time staring at the floor than speaking. For a long time, Hayes drifted, working shifts, eating meals out of habit, his heart sealed inside grief's hollow chambers. Then came Kaiser, a pup with sharp eyes and oversized paws, all energy and promise. The department had assigned him to Hayes as a trainee, just another handler in the long chain of canine partners. But from the first day, something clicked. Hayes had looked down at the squirming pup, who refused to sit, refused to be still, and muttered, "You're stubborn as hell." Kaiser had wagged his tail, as if he'd understood. Training became their language of healing. Hayes's voice grew steadier each time Kaiser obeyed a command. His grief-heavy mornings lightened with the dog's eager bark echoing in the yard. The house that had once been only silence filled with the sounds of nails clicking against hardwood, bowls clinking, the quiet sigh of a shepherd settling at the foot of a bed. And on the streets, they became inseparable. Together, they tracked fugitives across neighborhoods where gunshots still echoed at night. Kaiser's nose led them through alleys where blood ran into gutters, through fields where footprints vanished in mud. Hayes trusted him in ways he could no longer trust people. When Kaiser froze and bristled at an abandoned shed, Hayes didn't ask why. He raised his weapon. More than once, that trust kept both men alive. But it wasn't only the manhunts. There were rescues too, the kind that carved themselves into memory. A hiker lost in the snow, buried beneath an avalanche of rock and ice. Search teams had combed the ridges for hours with nothing to show but frostbite. Kaiser plunged into the drifts nose first, digging until paws bled, until his bark cut through the blizzard. Beneath him, weak fingers clawed up from the snow. Hayes hauled the man free, but it was Kaiser's determination that had made the difference between a corpse and a survivor. Or the child, 6 years old, locked in a trailer miles from town after a desperate man tried to silence his debts with kidnapping. Hours had stretched into eternity as deputies kicked doors, combed empty fields. Hayes had nearly lost hope until Kaiser froze, ears pricked, nose quivering toward the faintest whiff of sweat and duct tape. They found the girl shivering in the dark, tears streaking her dirt-stained face. She had clutched Kaiser's fur like a lifeline, and Hayes had felt something ease inside him for the first time since his wife's passing. Kaiser had not only been a partner, he had been a bridge back to life. The years turned them into legend inside the Clark County Sheriff's Department. Hayes and Kaiser, deputies would say, shaking their heads after another impossible track ended in cuffs or a rescue. Hayes's daughter began to smile again, bringing friends home who laughed at the big shepherd sprawled across the living room rug. In every way that mattered, Kaiser had become more than a dog. He was family, until the flood. It had begun with rain in Arizona, far south of where they patrolled. A family trapped in a canyon, water levels rising. Hayes and Kaiser had gone in with a team, navigating trails slick with mud. The storm broke harder than anyone expected. Within minutes, the canyon floor turned into a roaring torrent. Rocks splintered. Trees snapped like twigs. Hayes remembered the moment with perfect clarity. The father screaming for his children on the far ledge. The deputies scrambling to throw ropes. He remembered Kaiser lunging into the water toward a struggling boy, jaws locking onto the child's jacket to drag him clear. And then, chaos. The current surged, swallowing everything. Hayes had screamed Kaiser's name as the shepherd lost his footing, swept downstream in a crush of debris. For a moment, Hayes had seen him, paddling desperately, ears flat against his skull. Then the river curved, and Kaiser was gone. Days blurred into weeks. Search teams combed the canyon, pulling wreckage from the banks. They found the boy alive, but no shepherd. Deputies brought Hayes the battered tags they'd recovered from the river. The paperwork called it a death in the line of duty. The department issued condolences. Hayes buried the tags in his backyard beneath a cedar tree, alone. But the leash remained in his pocket. Always. In his heart, Hayes carried a wound that would not close. He returned to the job, but the rhythm was broken. He walked the house alone again, listening for paws that no longer clicked against wood. At night sometimes, he woke up certain he'd heard a bark, faint and distant. But morning always came with silence. And Kaiser became a ghost. Except now, crouched beside a sunburned child tied to a thorny shrub, the ghost remembered. He remembered Hayes's hand on his collar, the sharp bark of, "Find him, boy," the rush of adrenaline when he had led his partner to the lost and desperate. Every breath Lily took, shallow and ragged, tethered him to that memory. The flood had taken him from duty, but it had not taken the instincts from his blood. The desert thought it had claimed him, but the desert was wrong. Blitz had not been born into kindness. He carried the evidence across his skin. Thin white scars etched along his back, a crooked notch at his tail, patches of fur that grew uneven where wounds had healed without care. To most who looked at him, he was just another stray, another failure abandoned on the edge of nowhere. But each scar told its own quiet story, a record of nights spent fighting for scraps, of kicks too sudden to dodge, of hands that struck more than they ever offered food. He remembered hunger before he remembered warmth. The ache in his stomach had been his first teacher, gnawing him awake in the silence of alleys and empty fields. Hunger drove him into trash bins behind diners, where fry oil clung to his fur and sharp cans sliced his muzzle. Hunger taught him to move quickly, to run at the sound of boots, to keep his head low when the voices of men rose sharp and ugly. Once, there was a chain. He remembered that too. The weight of rust biting into his neck, the circle of dirt where his paws had worn the ground bare. Days of thirst under a sun that burned hotter than his small body could endure. And then, silence. The man had stopped coming. The chain had rusted through, snapping when Blitz pulled hard enough. He remembered stumbling free, his neck raw, his body weak, but his legs carrying him anyway, because to stop was to die. The desert became both punishment and promise. Blitz learned where water gathered in shallow cracks of rock, how to chase lizards when rabbits were too fast. He learned that silence could be safe, that barking brought only fists or fear. But he was still young then, too young to carry the kind of loneliness the desert pressed on him. That was when he found the culvert, a cracked roadside pipe where rainwater sometimes gathered, half choked with weeds and debris. Blitz had crawled there one night, ribs visible beneath his skin, his body shaking from exhaustion. The smell of damp stone and old oil filled his nose as he curled into the curve of concrete, too tired to care if coyotes followed. For the first time in weeks, he slept without fear of the open sky. When he woke, Kaiser was there. The older shepherd stood at the edge of the culvert, broad-shouldered, scarred, his amber eyes fixed on the trembling stray inside. Blitz had scrambled backward, teeth bared in panic, a growl rattling from his dry throat. He had expected violence. Every encounter with dogs larger than him had ended that way. He waited for the rush of muscle, the snap of jaws, but Kaiser did not move. He only stood, watching with that stillness only seasoned survivors carried. His nose twitched once, inhaling Blitz's fear, his hunger, his weakness. Then he lowered his head and lapped water from the shallow pool at the culvert's mouth, slow and unhurried. Blitz stayed frozen, growling, until thirst betrayed him. His tongue lolled, his throat burning, and he crept forward, inch by inch. Kaiser shifted, but did not stop him. Blitz drank, trembling, his side pressed against cold stone. He expected the larger dog to strike at any moment, but instead, Kaiser stepped back, granting him the space. That was the first lesson. Kaiser was not a threat. He was something else. For days after, Blitz trailed at a distance. The older shepherd never beckoned, never chased him off either. He hunted alone, moved deliberately, and when he slept beneath jagged rocks, Blitz lingered just far enough to see, but not touch. The desert was cruel, but in Kaiser's shadow there was a strange rhythm, measured steps, deliberate choices, a discipline Blitz didn't understand, but wanted to mimic. Trust did not come easily. When Kaiser caught a rabbit and left scraps behind, Blitz circled the carcass for hours, convinced it was a trap. Hunger won eventually, and the taste of meat on his tongue felt like something holy. The next time, when Kaiser tore into a lizard and left half uneaten, Blitz approached sooner. By the third, he no longer waited. It was not friendship. Not yet. It was survival. But survival has a way of weaving bonds where words never could. They began to move together. Blitz, always ahead, restless, bounding, testing the air, with unspent youth. Kaiser, steady, deliberate, anchoring the chaos of the young stray's energy. At night, when coyotes howled from the ridges, Blitz pressed closer, finding courage in the silent bulk of the scarred shepherd. And when Blitz woke up snarling from dreams of chains and fists, Kaiser's presence at his side kept the nightmares from consuming him whole. Blitz learned patience from Kaiser, learned that silence could be power, that caution was not weakness. He watched the way Kaiser's ears moved with the wind, the way his paws pressed softly into sand, leaving little sound. He tried to copy it, though more often his energy betrayed him, sending him crashing too loudly through brush. Kaiser's low rumble would correct him, and Blitz would crouch, tail wagging apologetically, before trying again. The pact between them was never spoken, but it became law. Kaiser allowed him to stay. Blitz, in return, chose not to leave. In a desert where every day stripped something away, water, strength, hope, they had found a way to share the burden. And when they first stumbled upon the faint whimper of a child drifting through the wind, it was not by chance. It was the culmination of months spent learning each other's rhythm, of two broken creatures choosing, again and again, to keep walking side by side. For Blitz, Lily's voice struck like lightning. It was the sound he had never heard in his darkest nights. Someone weaker than him, in need. His instincts roared with urgency, with desperate need to help, though he didn't know how. And yet, when he looked at Kaiser and saw the old shepherd's steady gaze, he understood. There was a way. From the culvert to this moment, Blitz's story had been one of running, hiding, surviving. But now, with Kaiser at his side and a child in the thorns, his scars no longer marked abandonment. They marked preparation. He had survived this. The desert had a way of disguising death. Heat pulled the color from skin. Wind scattered the scent of life, until it thinned to nothing. Many a body had sat slumped against stone out here, mistaken for living long after breath had ended. But when Kaiser lowered his head to the girl, he knew she had not crossed that line yet. Her pulse fluttered weakly beneath the rope, a fragile rhythm, uneven, like a candle sputtering in wind. He pressed his nose gently against her wrist, inhaling the faint trace of life clinging to her. It was there, but fading fast. Lily's chest rose in shallow jerks, each breath wheezing with the telltale whistle of constricted lungs. Kaiser recognized the sound. Once, in another life, he had ridden in the back of Hayes's patrol truck when a deputy's son suffered an asthma attack. He remembered the frantic gasps, the desperate struggle for air. This was the same, but here there was no inhaler, no medic racing down highways, only sand, heat, and two shepherds. Blitz whined, pacing in frantic circles around the child. His paws clawed at the dirt as if digging for a solution hidden beneath the ground. He nosed at her shoulder, licked at the sweat-matted skin of her arm, but nothing eased the rattle in her chest. He looked at Kaiser then, ears pinned back, eyes wide with a question he didn't know how to ask. Kaiser's answer was in his stillness. He leaned closer to Lily, his body steady, deliberate. His jaw ached as he tested the rope again, teeth grinding against fibers. The nylon bit deep, refusing to give, but one thread frayed, splitting beneath his persistence. It wasn't enough, not yet. But it was a beginning. The girl stirred, lips cracked and dry, whispering something no louder than a sigh. So, thirsty. The word triggered something buried deep in Kaiser's memory. Commands, long forgotten, surfaced like ghosts. Search, Find water. Hayes's voice echoed in the chambers of instinct. Water meant survival. Water meant life. His ears flicked sharply, and he lifted his head. Blitz caught the signal too. He froze mid-whine, nose twitching at the air. Then, without waiting, he bolted, his dark form vanishing across the sand, tail stiff, body low to the ground. Kaiser didn't stop him. The young shepherd's energy, wild and unrefined, had found direction. Alone now, Kaiser stayed pressed close to Lily. He nudged her cheek gently with his nose, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. It was not quite a growl, not quite a whine, but a promise. She blinked, glassy eyes fluttering open, barely able to focus. Still, she reached weakly toward him, her tiny fingers brushing his muzzle. The touch was faint, but it steadied him more than any command ever had. Minutes dragged like hours under the sun. The girl's breathing grew shallower, her chest rising with painful effort. Kaiser lay beside her, body shielding her from the direct blaze, every sense straining for danger. He could hear the hiss of wind dragging sand across rock, the faint creak of the shrub's thorny branches, the uneven whistle of her lungs. Then Blitz returned. His muzzle was wet, cactus spines clinging to the fur around his lips. In his jaws, he carried a torn paddle of prickly pear cactus, green and oozing with bitter moisture. He dropped it carefully at Lily's side, then pawed at it, tearing it open with clumsy determination. The scent of water, faint but undeniable, drifted into the air. Lily's eyelids fluttered. She turned her head weakly, eyes catching the glisten of pulp. With trembling fingers, she reached for it. Kaiser pressed his body against hers, steadying her arm as she scooped a piece into her mouth. The taste was bitter, acrid, but the liquid slid down her throat like salvation. She swallowed with a ragged sigh, eyes closing again, her chest rising just a little easier. Blitz yipped softly, tail thumping against the sand. He leaned forward, licking the pulp from her fingers as if urging her to take more. She obeyed, slow and unsteady, but each swallow seemed to anchor her closer to life. Kaiser lowered his head beside hers once more, watching, guarding. The desert around them was vast, merciless, ready to erase her the moment they faltered. But together, the two shepherds had pulled her one step back from the edge. It was not enough to save her. Not yet. She was still too weak, her breath still ragged, her body still bound. But it was enough to remind them all, child and dogs alike, that survival was possible. Blitz circled once, restless, then flopped down heavily near her feet, panting hard, but eyes bright. His youth burned with urgency, with the need to act again, to fix more. Kaiser, older and tempered, knew the truth. Survival was not speed. It was endurance. His gaze swept across the horizon, scanning for movement. Whoever had left Lily here might return. And if they did, they would not find her unguarded. The vow formed in silence. Kaiser did not speak, Blitz did not understand words, and Lily was too weak to ask. But the promise was there, carved deeper than language. Protect her, keep her alive, until help came, or until they could no longer stand. Kaiser pressed his forehead gently against Lily's arm, closing his eyes for a moment. Blitz whined softly and rested his muzzle across her legs. Between them, the fragile child lay tethered not only to rope and thorn, but now to something stronger, loyalty. The desert had thought to claim her, but Kaiser and Blitz had already claimed the mission, and missions, once begun, were never abandoned. Before the desert heat swallowed her cries, before the ropes cut into her wrists, Lily Morgan had been just another child at play. That Sunday morning had carried the ordinary sweetness of family rituals. Her parents, Dana and Eric, had packed the truck with coolers, folding chairs, and a tangle of fishing rods. They spoke in the shorthand of couples who knew each other well. Half sentences, gestures, small smiles passed between them as they loaded gear. Lily had bounded around their legs, more energy than the two of them could manage, her pink shirt already streaked with dust before the day had even begun. Lake Mead stretched wide beneath the Nevada sky, its waters blue as polished glass. Families dotted the shoreline with bright umbrellas and portable grills, but Dana and Eric had chosen a quieter patch of sand framed by rocky ledges. For them, the lake wasn't just a vacation spot. It was tradition. Eric had fished here as a boy, taught by his own father, and he wanted Lily to know the joy of skipping stones across water, of hearing the crackle of campfires beneath starlight. Lily, though, had little patience for stillness. The second the cooler hit the ground, she had darted toward the shoreline, crouching low to watch a lizard skitter across sun-baked stone. Her laughter rang out, sharp and clear, as she cupped her hands to catch the tiny creature. When she returned to her mother minutes later, the lizard sat squirming inside a jar she had scavenged from the picnic kit. "Look, Mom," she chirped, eyes wide with triumph. "He's mine now. His name is Captain Whiskers." Dana laughed despite herself, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. "Sweetheart, you can't keep him. Lizards belong out here, not in a jar." "But I'll feed him," Lily insisted, holding the jar close. Her fingers were grubby, her knees scraped, but her grin was bright enough to soften even her mother's resolve. Eric chuckled from where he was unfolding chairs. "Let her be, Dana. Every explorer needs a first discovery." For Lily, the desert was not a place of danger, but of secrets waiting to be found. She darted back to the rocks, her ponytail bouncing, her voice carrying across the sand in snatches of excited chatter. Each stone overturned revealed beetles. Each patch of grass held some treasure her eyes alone could spot. The innocence of those moments glowed like sunlight through glass. Fragile, fleeting. Neither Dana nor Eric realized how quickly it would shatter. It happened in a sliver of time so thin it could barely be measured. Dana was folding blankets. Eric bent over the cooler, arranging sandwiches. Lily's voice, which had filled the air for hours, drifted into the background. First laughing at her jar, then talking softly to her lizard prisoner. And then, nothing. Dana looked up, a mother's instinct prickling before reason had a chance to catch up. The patch of rocks where Lily had crouched lay empty, her pink shirt no longer flashing between boulders. Dana called her name once, lightly, expecting an answering giggle. Silence. Eric straightened, scanning the shoreline. "Lily?" His tone carried no fear at first, only mild confusion. Children wondered. It was what they did. But when no small voice answered, when the jar with Captain Whiskers still sat abandoned in the dirt, the air seemed to grow heavier. Dana's heart seized. She dropped the blanket, her voice sharper now, louder. "Lily!" The silence that answered was the first knife. Eric strode toward the waterline, eyes darting across the waves, half expecting to see her splashing recklessly. Nothing. He ran toward the rocks, calling again, louder. Still nothing. Panic spread like fire. Dana clutched the empty jar in her hands, her eyes wide as she turned in circles, scanning every corner of the campsite, every crevice of stone. Her voice broke into a scream. Lily! Other families along the beach turned their heads. Some rose from chairs, uncertain, curiosity mixing with dread. Within minutes, strangers were running too, fanning across the sand, voices calling, echoing, growing desperate. But there had been no scream when she vanished, no struggle, no sound of slipping into water or rustling in brush. One moment Lily had been there, chattering to her lizard. The next, she was gone, swallowed whole by silence. Dana fell to her knees, clutching at the ground as if she might dig her child free. Eric sprinted up the ridge, his voice hoarse, calling again and again. Nothing but the mocking echo of wind returned to him. That was how the nightmare began. In the hours that followed, deputies arrived, radios crackling, boots pounding the sand. Helicopters scoured the ridges, blades churning air, shadows sweeping across the lake. Posters would soon bloom on gas station windows, her smile frozen in time, her gap-toothed grin staring from cardboard pleas for help. But in that first moment, the moment of vanishing, all that existed was the gut-deep dread of parents who turned for just a heartbeat and found their world emptied. Lily's jar lay overturned in the sand. The lizard had scrambled free, vanishing into the rocks. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the lake, and the silence that settled over the campsite carried with it a truth that cut deeper than any scream could have. Lily was gone. The first minutes after Lily vanished were a blur of movement and sound, her name echoing off rocks, strangers' voices rising in urgency, the pounding of Eric's boots against uneven ground. But minutes stretched into hours, and with each passing one, the silence grew heavier. The search had begun, but the desert was vast, and time merciless. Dana ran the shoreline until her lungs burned, her voice cracking on each shout of Lily's name. She stumbled on rocks, fell to her knees, then scrambled back up, refusing to stop. Eric charged through the scrub, clawing through brush with bleeding hands, convinced she had only wandered off, that she was hiding somewhere, waiting to be found. But each hollow turned empty. Each ridge revealed only more dust. By the time deputies arrived, the sun was dropping lower, painting the lake in cruel gold. Sirens wailed briefly before cutting off. Radios crackled with clipped commands, and men in uniforms began sweeping the terrain in practiced grids. They carried ropes, spotlights, first aid kits, but no amount of equipment could soothe the terror on Dana's face. She clutched the small jar Lily had abandoned, her knuckles white around the glass. "She was right here," she told the first deputy who asked. "She was showing me her lizard. I looked away for 1 second, just one, and then she was gone." Her voice broke, and she pressed the jar to her chest, as though it still held her daughter's heartbeat. Eric stormed up and down the ridge, barking at deputies to search faster, to bring more men, to call more helicopters. His voice, normally even, was ragged with desperation. "She couldn't have gone far. She's 7 years old. She's afraid of the dark. She wouldn't just vanish." His words tumbled out in denial, refusing to bend to the possibility clawing at him. Night fell heavy. Floodlights flared across the campsite, casting sharp shadows on the sand. Helicopters roared overhead, their beams sweeping the lake surface in pale cones of light. Dogs were brought in, noses pressed to Lily's shirt pulled hastily from her mother's bag. They darted through brush, whining, pulling handlers toward trails that faded into nothing. Each time, hope spiked, only to collapse into silence again. Dana sat on the ground near the abandoned camp, her body trembling under a blanket an officer had draped across her shoulders. She stared at the lizard jar in her lap, rocking faintly, whispering her daughter's name as though the wind itself might carry it to her. "Lily, Lily, come back to me." Her voice cracked into sobs that seemed too raw to belong to the same woman who had laughed that morning at her daughter's pink-stained knees. Eric refused to sit. He stalked the perimeter of the camp like a caged animal, shouting at anyone who paused too long, demanding updates that never came. When deputies suggested pausing until daylight, his fury broke loose. Daylight? She doesn't have until daylight. She's out there now. She's alone. She's cold. And you want to wait? His fists clenched, his body shaking with rage and helplessness. In the days that followed, despair settled in like dust, creeping into every corner of their lives. Posters bloomed across Nevada, Lily's smiling school photo plastered on gas station windows, pinned to diner walls, taped to the backs of police cruisers. Dana had chosen the picture, the one where Lily's front tooth was missing, where her hair stuck out unevenly, her grin gap-toothed and unashamed. She wanted the world to remember her child's joy, not the fading details of her last moments. Each poster was a plea. Missing. Age 7. Last seen at Lake Mead. Truckers paused at counters to stare at her face. Strangers whispered in grocery lines. Volunteers stapled the images to telephone poles until entire towns seemed to watch through Lily's bright eyes. But with each sunrise, the desert stole more hope. Search teams trudged across ridges until boots tore blisters, their shirts soaked in sweat. Helicopters swept wider circles, but the terrain swallowed noise and light. Time worked against them. The Mojave sun stripped moisture from skin in hours, baked life out of lungs. For a child with asthma, each breath without water or shelter could be her last. Dana stopped sleeping. Her body moved on autopilot, trailing behind deputies with photographs in hand, whispering her daughter's name to strangers at gas pumps, to cashiers who nodded with hollow sympathy. Her eyes grew sunken, her voice hoarse, but she never stopped calling. Eric grew brittle. He snapped at reporters, slammed doors on neighbors who came with casseroles, cursed at deputies when leads went cold. He punched a dent into the hood of his own truck the night the sheriff told him they had no new evidence. The desert, the man said softly, had taken too many before. But the desert hadn't taken Lily. Not yet. In motel rooms where deputies laid maps across tables, Dana traced her finger across grids marked with red ink, whispering, "She's there. She has to be." Eric stared at the maps with a hollow glare, his jaw tight, his knuckles bruised. Every hour stretched like a lifetime. Every unanswered call of her name hollowed them further. And still, beneath the roar of helicopters, beneath the shuffle of boots and the crackle of radios, the desert remained silent. A silence that mocked them with its vastness, that seemed to whisper one chilling truth into their bones. Children disappear here, and the sand keeps its secrets well. The desert pressed down like a weight on Lily's chest. Each breath scraped raw, shallow, and uneven, as though the air itself had turned to glass, shards cutting her lungs. The ropes that bound her wrists dug deeper, their fibers stiff with dried blood, each twitch of movement sparking pain. She wanted to cry, to scream for her mother, but even the thought was too heavy. Her lips cracked when she tried, yielding nothing but a rasp of air. Through half-shuttered eyes, she saw the blur of two shapes, dark against the molten sand. At first, in the haze of heat and fear, she thought they were coyotes, circling to finish what the desert had begun. Her heart thumped weakly, her body stiffening in dread. But then the shapes drew closer, their steps deliberate, their bodies held not in hunger, but in focus. German shepherds. Lily blinked hard, her vision swimming. The older one moved with gravity, every muscle coiled in quiet strength. Scars crisscrossed his muzzle, his ear torn at the tip, yet his eyes glowed steady, amber and sharp. The younger shadow darted restlessly around him, ears flicking, tail quivering with energy, his movements reckless but not cruel. They were not wild things. They were different. Her throat burned when she tried to speak. Still, a single word broke free, ragged and faint, carried off almost immediately by the wind. "Help!" It was barely more than a sigh, but the moment it escaped her, both shepherds froze. Blitz, young, restless, whimpered, spinning in circles, his paws scattering dust. His whines rose in pitch, desperate, as though he understood more than his body could contain. He pawed at the ground, then at her ankle, as if urging her to rise, to run. His dark eyes brimmed with frantic light, begging her not to stop fighting. The elder shepherd, Kaiser, remained still for a long breath. His ears tilted forward, catching every rattle of her lungs, every tremor in her small chest. Then he lowered himself slowly, his body sinking to the sand, until his massive head rested inches from hers. His breath was warm against her skin, a steady rhythm where her own faltered. He didn't lick, didn't whine, didn't move in frenzy. He simply pressed close, his forehead brushing the side of her arm, the gesture heavy with silent promise. She blinked at him, her vision trembling. In his eyes, she didn't see the hunger of scavengers, nor the empty indifference of the desert. She saw steadiness. She saw something ancient and unspoken. Loyalty that asked for nothing in return. Her lips parted again, cracked and bloodied. No sound came this time, but her eyes welled, a shimmer of tears that stung under the sun. She wanted to tell him she was afraid, that she couldn't breathe, that she missed her mother's arms. But the words stayed trapped inside her. Kaiser didn't need them. The vow was already made. For 3 years, he had wandered without command, his instincts buried under survival. But kneeling beside this child, hearing the smallest plea forced through her broken voice, he remembered everything. The scent of human life clinging to the edge of death. The weight of trust placed on him in moments no one else could carry. The echo of Daniel Hayes's voice, sharp with command, but layered with faith. "Find them, boy. Bring them back." Kaiser pressed closer, his nose brushing her cheek in reassurance. His amber gaze never left her, scanning the horizon even as he stayed by her side. In his stillness was a message older than language. "You are not alone." Blitz circled once more, restless, his youthful heart unable to find stillness. But when he saw the way Kaiser lay against her, steady and unyielding, he dropped too, curling at her feet. His tail thumped weakly in the dust, his eyes fixed on her face as if sheer willpower could keep her awake. Lily let her eyes close for a moment. She didn't want to. She wanted to stay awake, to hold on, but exhaustion dragged her down. Still, even as her eyelids fell, she felt the weight of warmth pressed against her arm and leg, the steady hum of 2 beating hearts, bracketing her against the emptiness. The desert whispered overhead, dry and cruel. Yet in the hollow carved by 2 shepherds' bodies, a different truth rooted itself. They would not leave. Not until she rose again. Not until breath filled her chest with more than rattles. Not until she was returned. Kaiser and Blitz were strangers to her, but in the desert's cruel silence, they became something else. Her shield, her promise, her only chance. and as the sun dragged shadows long across the sand, the vow held fast. They would protect her. They would keep her alive, whatever the cost. The desert had left its mark on the rope as much as on the child. The nylon was weathered, sun-stiffened, its threads hardened into something closer to wire than fiber. Each knot had been tied with cruel precision, pulled so tight it had fused into itself. Whoever had bound Lily here had not intended for her to ever come free. Kaiser lowered his head to the girl's wrist, his nose brushing the coarse fibers. He inhaled the smell of dried blood, the sour sting of sweat baked into the nylon, the faint metallic tang of skin rubbed raw. His eyes narrowed. This wasn't just restraint, it was malice, deliberate and cold. He opened his jaws and set his teeth to the rope. The first bite sent a lightning bolt of pain flashing through his skull. The fractured canine, broken years earlier in the line of duty, screamed as it ground against the hardened fibers. His jaw ached, muscles pulling taut with the effort. Still, he held on, grinding, chewing, pulling. Each second was agony, but each thread he split was a victory. Lily stirred faintly, her bound hand twitching as the rope cut deeper with his efforts. Her lips parted, a weak moan escaping, but she did not pull away. Some part of her seemed to understand what he was doing, even in her haze. Blitz paced nearby, unable to stand still. His paws dragged furrows into the sand as he circled the thorny shrub, ears twitching at every whisper of wind. He darted toward the ridge, nose lifted, then back again, restless energy surging through him like fire. The desert carried more than silence. It carried threats, unseen but approaching. Blitz felt them in the prickle of his fur, in the way the air shifted heavy against his chest. He growled once, low and sharp, spinning toward the horizon as if daring whatever lurked to show itself. But nothing came, only heat, only wind. Kaiser ignored the pain, his jaws working with mechanical rhythm. Bite, pull, grind, spit. The taste of nylon filled his mouth, bitter and foul. His tongue bled where the rope's fibers had cut it. His broken tooth screamed with every pressure, but he pressed harder. This wasn't about him. Pain was irrelevant. A strand snapped. Just one, so thin it was almost nothing. But it was enough. The knot shifted a fraction, loosening just slightly around Lily's wrist. Kaiser paused only long enough to adjust his angle, then bit down again. His whole body shuddered with the strain, muscles in his neck bulging. Blitz stopped his circling long enough to watch, ears pricked, eyes wide. A whine broke from his throat, high-pitched and anxious, as though urging the older shepherd to endure, to keep going. He pawed the dirt beside Lily's legs, nosing at her ankles as if to reassure her that she was not forgotten in this silent battle against rope. Lily's breathing rasped, shallow and ragged, her chest rising like a tide that might never crest. Dust clung to the sweat on her cheeks, turning her skin gray beneath the sunburn. Her eyes opened briefly, glassy and unfocused, landing on the massive shepherd bent over her. She whispered something, too faint to catch, then closed them again. Kaiser redoubled his effort. His jaw trembled from the force, teeth grinding until sparks of agony shot behind his eyes. He shifted, clamping lower, and bit again. Another fiber frayed, curling outward like a broken thread of hair. Blitz barked suddenly, sharp and explosive, the sound carrying across the desert. His whole body stiffened, hackles rising. Something. Distant footsteps. The echo of rock shifting had pricked his senses. He bounded a few yards away, ears trained forward, tail stiff. A warning rumble grew in his chest. Kaiser did not lift his head. He trusted Blitz to guard. He had no luxury of distraction now. The rope demanded his full weight, his full will. His jaw ground again, mouth filling with the copper tang of blood, as his gums tore against the nylon. The broken tooth felt ready to crack in half, but still he bit harder until another snap echoed faintly in the air. The knot loosened further. Lily's wrist slid a fraction of an inch, blood welling fresh where fibers tore skin. She whimpered weakly, her head tilting toward him. Blitz returned to her side, nudging her arm gently with his nose, tail swishing in nervous arcs. He pressed close, his body vibrating with tension, torn between protecting her and racing toward the invisible threats he sensed. His young heart didn't understand patience, but his loyalty anchored him here, circling her like a restless sentinel. The desert wind rose, carrying grit that stung eyes and fur. Kaiser blinked against it, pulling back for one moment, chest heaving. His tongue lolled, flecked with blood and spit. Pain throbbed through his skull, but his eyes, steady, unblinking, never left the rope. He leaned in once more. This time he didn't stop. He tore, ground, chewed until his entire head shook with the effort. His body trembled from exertion, his jaw locking around the stubborn fibers as if his very soul refused to release. And then, at last, the rope gave way, a long strand snapping loose. The knot loosened visibly now, sagging against Lily's arm. Not free yet, not completely, but closer. Much closer. Kaiser stepped back, chest rising and falling like bellows. He licked the blood from his lips, then nudged her bound hand gently, testing the slack. It moved, just slightly. Her fingers twitched, curling weakly around his muzzle. Blitz yipped softly, tail whipping the dust, his entire body a quiver of joy at even this smallest victory. He pawed again at her ankle, nosing her leg with eager urgency, as if telling her, "Hold on, just a little longer." Kaiser lowered his head beside hers, his amber eyes steady, his breath warm against her skin. He had not finished. The rope was still there, but he would not stop until it was gone. The desert might strip skin, steal water, and break the weak, but it would not claim this child. Not while his teeth could still bite, not while his jaw could still hold. Blitz lifted his head suddenly, ears flicking. His body stiffened again, a low growl rolling from his throat. Danger was near, closer than before. He stood rigid, tail bristled, eyes locked on the ridges beyond. The world outside their circle of sand was shifting, preparing to strike. But Kaiser did not look away from the girl. His head pressed to her chest for a moment, feeling the faint, uneven thrum of her heart. It was enough. She was alive. He turned back to the rope, and he bit again. The girl's lips moved again, the faintest breath scraping past her throat. So thirsty. The sound was barely there, a rasp thin enough to vanish into the desert wind. Yet it pierced Blitz like a command. His ears flicked forward, body tensing, as if the word had crawled beneath his skin and lit something alive in him. He whined, spinning once in agitation, then darted away in a burst of energy that sent dust spiraling behind him. Kaiser lifted his head, but did not follow. His instincts told him to stay, to anchor himself beside the child. He had begun to loosen the rope. Her wrist bore the marks of his teeth, raw and trembling with blood and slackened fiber. He couldn't leave her vulnerable. So he stayed, lowering his head close to her again, eyes steady, ears pricked. The mission was not just escape, it was endurance. She had to survive long enough for escape to matter. Blitz vanished into the shimmering heat, paws pounding the sand, nose low to the ground. The scent of thirst lingered in his ears, as if her voice itself had seeped into his skin. He didn't know water like humans did, but he knew moisture. He had lived in the desert long enough to follow faint traces, the damp cool of shaded stone, the fragile reservoirs clinging to stubborn life. His paws cut across a stretch of thorny brush. He stopped, nose twitching violently. There. It was faint, but undeniable. The smell of green, of water hidden in flesh. A prickly pear cactus clung stubbornly to the earth, its paddles swollen with juice, its spines sharp as daggers against predators. Blitz barked once, a sharp, triumphant sound before lunging at it. Pain sparked as thorns pricked his muzzle, but he ignored it. His jaws clamped on one paddle, yanking hard until the stem tore free. Juice coated his tongue, bitter and strange, but his instincts screamed that it was the answer. His muzzle dripped green as he carried it back, spines scratching his lips. When he reappeared, Kaiser's head snapped up, ears twitching. Blitz bounded toward them, dropping the cactus paddle beside the girl with a heavy thump. He panted hard, tongue lolling, his eyes alight with fierce urgency. Without hesitation, he pressed his paw against the paddle, claws digging deep. The thick skin split, oozing translucent pulp that glistened under the sun. Blitz pawed harder, tearing the flesh until chunks of wet, bitter life spilled out onto the sand. The scent of water filled the air. Not clean, not sweet, but wet. Lily stirred. Her cracked lips parted, her swollen eyelids fluttering open. Her gaze, fogged and broken, caught the glisten beside her arm. For a moment, confusion shadowed her face. Then instinct, older than words, drove her trembling fingers forward. She scooped a piece of pulp into her mouth. The taste was sharp, sour, almost unbearable, but the liquid coated her dry tongue, slid down her parched throat like salvation. She coughed once, weak and rasping, but swallowed again, her body convulsing with need. Blitz nosed at her hand, urging, pawing the cactus until more pulp spilled free. His tail wagged in frantic arcs, his eyes glued to her mouth as she swallowed. It was as though he could feel her survival anchoring him too. Each drop of water a victory against the desert's grasp. Kaiser watched with measured calm, but even his heart stirred at the sight. Her breathing, though still shallow, gained the faintest rhythm of strength. The grayness in her cheeks softened just slightly, a whisper of color seeping back beneath the burns. The mission's first step had been answered. The girl let her head fall back against the shrub, her chest rising in uneven gasps. A faint sigh escaped her lips, almost peaceful. Her fingers, sticky with pulp, curled instinctively into Kaiser's fur when he leaned close again. The warmth of his body seemed to ground her, to tether her to the world she had nearly slipped beyond. Blitz lay down heavily beside her legs, panting, his body trembling with both exertion and relief. His muzzle was damp with cactus juice, spines clinging to his lips. He licked his chops, wincing faintly, then nosed at her ankle with determination, as if to say, "Don't stop. Keep going." The girl lifted her fingers again, slower this time, but steadier. She brought another piece of pulp to her mouth. Her eyes opened briefly, catching the restless young shepherd at her feet. For the first time, something flickered there. Recognition. She swallowed, then rasped out a single word through her cracked lips. "Good." The word broke Blitz open. He yipped softly, wagging his tail until it swept dust in frantic arcs, his whole body vibrating with joy. He pressed his head against her leg, whining softly, needing her to know he understood, that he would not leave. Kaiser lowered his head beside her once more, pressing his forehead gently against her bound arm. His gaze swept across the desert, searching the horizon, even as he leaned into her with steady strength. She was not safe yet. The cactus had given her time, but time in the desert was always fleeting. Still, in this fragile hollow of heat and silence, something unshakable had taken root. Two dogs, one scarred by years, one scarred by youth, had chosen her, not by command, not by leash, not by human design, but by instinct deeper than survival. And though the desert howled for her life, they had given her back a flicker of it. The cactus juice was bitter. The thorns had drawn blood. But in the raw simplicity of survival, it was nothing short of a miracle. Blitz licked her hand again, nudging the last of the pulp toward her. She swallowed weakly, sighing as though the weight of the sun had lessened, if only for a moment. Her eyes slid closed, but this time, her breath came steadier. Kaiser shifted, positioning himself fully between her and the open desert. Blitz curled tighter against her legs, his tail still twitching in protective arcs. The vow they had made deepened. No matter what the desert demanded, no matter what came over the ridges or through the silence, she would not die alone, not while they still drew breath. The desert had tried to reduce Lily Morgan to nothing but silence and breathless struggle. Yet now, with cactus pulp wetting her lips and her body pressed between two loyal forms, a faint spark returned. Her fingers, weak and trembling, stirred against the loosened coil of rope. They slid, sticky with cactus juice, across the ground, until they brushed against something warm. Kaiser's fur. The touch was so light, it might have been mistaken for wind. But Kaiser felt it. The weightless press of her tiny fingers against his flank sent a jolt through him, something he hadn't known in 3 long years. His muscles tightened, not from pain but from recognition. This wasn't instinct alone. It was a connection. Her hand curled clumsily, gripping a tuft of his coat. Her strength was barely enough to hold, yet she clutched him with the desperation of someone grabbing a rope over a cliff. Kaiser didn't move. He pressed closer, steady and firm, allowing her small fist to anchor itself into his fur. Her lips parted. A thin whistle of breath rasped through her chest, but this time it carried more than struggle. It carried will. Blitz watched with wide eyes. His ears perked. He whined softly, tail sweeping across the dust, sensing the shift. His restless body leaned forward, pressing his head against her legs, as if to add his own weight, his own promise. For a moment, the desert seemed to pause. The wind stilled, the heat shimmered without sound, and all that existed was the fragile bond between a child's trembling hand and the scarred shepherd who had once lived for moments exactly like this. Kaiser remembered Hayes. He remembered nights in the patrol truck, the weight of a human hand scratching behind his ears after long shifts. He remembered the tone of command that carried not dominance but trust. And he remembered the flood, the loss, the silence that followed. For 3 years he had roamed without anchor, living only to see the next dawn, his purpose drowned in waters that had taken everything from him. Until now. The pulse in Lily's wrist fluttered beneath the ragged rope, weak, uneven, but alive. Her grip tightened slightly, pulling at his fur with what little strength she had. In that clutch, Kaiser felt what no desert could take: meaning. He was not wandering anymore. He was not a ghost. He was exactly what he had always been meant to be. A guardian. He lowered his head until his muzzle brushed her cheek. His breath warmed her skin, steady and slow, a rhythm for her failing lungs to follow. She stirred, eyes fluttering open for a second, glassy blue meeting amber gold. Her lips moved without sound, but he saw the word form. Stay. And he would. Blitz let out a soft, eager yip, bounding in a quick circle before flopping down again, his body pressed tight to Lily's legs. His youth, wild and impatient, softened into something protective, mirroring Kaiser's stillness. The restless stray, who had once run from every hand, now pressed himself willingly against the weakest among them, his heartbeat sinking with hers. The desert, for all its cruelty, could not erase this. A pack, forged not by blood or command, but by need and loyalty. Lily's chest rose again, shaky but stronger. The cactus had given her back a thread of life, and now the shepherds wove it into something sturdier. She clutched Kaiser's fur, fingers sticky, nails barely scraping skin, but he did not flinch. He welcomed the weight, however fragile. Kaiser's mind reached backward as he lay there, pressed against the child. He recalled the rescues, the lost hiker's weak hand reaching from the snow, the kidnapped child clutching his neck in the dark trailer. He remembered how Hayes's voice had broken with pride when he had delivered life back from the edge. For years, he had thought that part of him buried. But now, here in the silence of the Mojave, a girl's trembling grip had pulled it free again. Purpose. It surged through his veins, stronger than pain, stronger than the fractured tooth still throbbing from the rope. His body ached with scars. His years had slowed him, but none of that mattered. He was no longer wandering without cause. His path had found him. Lily's lips parted once more. A faint sound, almost inaudible, slipped free. Good. Blitz's tail thumped furiously, sweeping sand. He whined, nosing her ankle in excitement, his eyes gleaming with joy. Kaiser's ears flicked, his gaze softening. The word was small, broken, but it was everything. It was her trust, her recognition that they were not predators circling death, but guardians pulling her back from it. Her fingers tightened, clutching him harder. He pressed his head gently against her arm, sealing the vow in silence. Protect her. Keep her alive. Bring her back. Blitz shifted closer, laying his head across her knees, his eyes darting between her face and Kaiser's. He didn't fully understand the purpose yet. He understood only the urgency, the need to move, to act. But seeing the girl's faint smile, hearing that broken word, even Blitz settled into stillness. For once, youth bowed to something greater. The desert wind picked up again, brushing across the rocks, carrying the faint howl of emptiness. But inside the small circle carved by a child and two shepherds, hope pulsed, fragile, imperfect, but real. Kaiser closed his eyes briefly, letting the child's heartbeat, faint as it was, sync with the steady rhythm of his own. Blitz sighed, his tail twitching softly against the sand. And between them, the girl exhaled, her chest rising just enough to prove she was still tethered here, still theirs to guard. For the first time in 3 years, Kaiser felt whole. And for the first time since she had vanished from Lake Mead, Lily Morgan was not alone. The motel room smelled of mildew and cigarette smoke, its curtains drawn tight against the neon flicker outside. A single bulb buzzed overhead, casting a yellow haze that made the stains on the carpet glow darker. The hum of an old air conditioner rattled through the wall, but it did nothing to cool the suffocating heat inside. Laura Bennett sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, hands trembling as they twisted the hem of her blouse. Her throat ached from swallowing back words she couldn't speak, her body tight with guilt that gnawed like acid. On the floor lay a crumpled piece of paper, a child's drawing. She had carried it in her purse for weeks before everything went wrong, once believing it was a gift, a token of love. Tonight, in this poisoned air, it was an indictment. It was Lily's drawing, scribbled stars and a rocket ship, two figures smiling from the windows, a child with a ponytail and her teacher with dark hair. Beneath it, in uneven letters, me and Ms. Bennett, explorers together. Laura's chest tightened. She could still hear Lily's eager voice that day in class, telling her about constellations and wanting to fly to forgotten places. She smiled then, hung the drawing on the board for everyone to see. And now Lily was out there, alone, bound, fading, because Laura hadn't stopped him. Pacing won't fix it. Her voice cracked, brittle. Across the room, Victor Kane prowled like a caged wolf, his boots grinding grit into the carpet. He moved with fury, less about guilt than about control slipping through his fingers. His hand twitched near the pistol on his hip. "Fix it?" His laugh was hollow. "There's no fixing this. The drop was blown. Cops were on us before the bag even hit the ground." He spun, eyes burning. Someone talked. Laura flinched. No one knew. It was just us. Victor sneered. "Naive. The world leaks. Cops always get whispers. That's why you cut loose when you have to." He jabbed a finger at her. "That's why we left her." The words struck like knives. Laura bit her tongue until it bled rather than scream. She had stood frozen in the desert, paralyzed by fear, as Victor tied Lily's wrists to a thorny shrub. The girl's face haunted her, tear-streaked, confused, whispering, "Ms. Bennett." "You didn't have to," Laura whispered. "She's a child." Victor slammed his palm against the wall, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "She was leveraged. When leverage fails, you cut it. That's the rule." "She trusted me." Silence stretched, broken only by the hum of the air conditioner. Victor's expression hardened into stone. "That's your problem. You still think trust means something. Out here, trust gets you killed. You either keep moving, or you burn." He resumed pacing, muttering about cops closing in, about routes north, about Vegas or further. Laura barely heard. Her eyes stayed on the drawing, her fingers brushing the paper, pressing it to her chest until her tears blurred the rocket ship. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Victor prowled, his paranoia dripping from every glance at the door. "They'll have checkpoints by dawn. Vegas won't be safe. Maybe Utah." Laura wanted to tell him she didn't care about Utah, about escape, about money. All she cared about was a 7-year-old girl fading in the desert. But the words stuck like stones. Suddenly he stopped, eyes gleaming sharp. "You're thinking about her again." Her breath caught. Silence was enough. Victor's mouth curled in contempt. "She's a liability. You keep picturing crayons and giggles, but out here, she's dead weight. She saw our faces. She could talk. She could point. Liability." Laura's throat burned. He said it like arithmetic, as if a child's life could be balanced on a ledger sheet. She wanted to scream, but fear rooted her in place, the same fear that had kept her frozen when Lily whispered her name. Victor's voice lowered, calm as ice. If you can't let go, you're the liability too. Don't forget that. Her heart stuttered. She nodded faintly, enough to keep him pacing instead of pressing further. Victor slumped into the broken armchair by the window, pistol laid across his thigh. His leg bounced, jaw clenching and unclenching, eyes darting between the door and the parking lot. He was never still, never silent for long. Laura sat hunched on the bed, her hands hidden in her lap. She had not spoken for hours. She didn't need to. Victor filled the silence with mutters about routes, supplies, excuses, never once touching the name that consumed her. Lily. It pressed against Laura's ribs with every breath, too heavy to carry yet impossible to release. She clutched the folded paper in her pocket like contraband. She remembered Lily's voice in class, always asking why, her laughter when caterpillars turned to butterflies. And she remembered the last whisper in the desert, cracked lips, glazed eyes. Ms. Bennett. Victor leaned forward suddenly, his eyes sharp. If the girl's still alive, the desert'll finish her off. That's one less problem. The words hit Laura like a slap. She kept her eyes down, forcing her hands still. Any sign of dissent and suspicion would sharpen like a blade. But something stirred beneath her silence, a seed of defiance. She thought of the trust parents had given her, of bulletin boards lined with drawings. That trust had been broken, maybe beyond repair, but not gone. Not while Lily still breathed somewhere in the desert. Victor's voice cut through again. Thinking about that kid will get you killed. She nodded quickly, murmuring, I know. Words meant only to placate him. Inside, the truth roared. I can't stop thinking about her. I won't. She slipped her hand into her pocket beneath the blanket, unfolding the drawing in secret. The stars shimmered in uneven crayon strokes. The rocket ship tilted sideways. The words wobbled but clear. Me and Ms. Bennett, explorers together. Tears pricked her eyes. She pressed the paper to her chest, hidden under her blouse, and whispered where he couldn't hear. I'm so sorry. The confession cracked something inside. Fear had paralyzed her too long, but Lily's faith, her trust, planted something stronger than fear. Victor would never see it. Not yet. To him, she was still the woman he had cowed into silence. But inside, Laura had shifted. Her guilt would haunt her every breath. But it also gave her clarity. She had been a teacher once, and deep down, she still was. And teachers did not abandon children. Not truly. Not forever. Laura wiped her eyes quickly, folded the drawing, slid it back into her pocket. It pulsed there like a heartbeat, like a vow. Fear still bound her tighter than rope. But the seed was planted, rooting deeper with every breath. And when the moment came, Laura Bennett would break. Not for herself, not for Victor, but for Lily. The command post was nothing more than a cluster of folding tables beneath a canvas canopy pitched against the desert sun. Radios crackled, paper maps flapped in the wind, and deputies shuffled from one patch of shade to another, their eyes rimmed red with exhaustion. By the fourth day of Lily Morgan's disappearance, Futility hung heavier than the heat. But Daniel Hayes refused to bend. At 60, the deputy sheriff carried the desert in his face, skin leathered by decades of sun, jaw carved by loss and long nights. He leaned over a satellite map spread across the hood of his patrol truck, his finger tracing ridges and dry creek beds with the precision of a man who had walked them all. Sweat matted his gray hair to his temples, but his eyes stayed sharp, unyielding. One of the younger deputies shifted uneasily. "Sheriff, we've pushed the grid as far as Sector 12. Nothing. And now you want to expand north? Into the restricted zone?" Hayes didn't look up. His finger circled a patch of pale red on the map. "That's exactly what I'm saying." Another deputy frowned. "With respect, sir, we don't have jurisdiction. It's federal land. Closed for a reason." Hayes straightened, his joints stiff, but his presence still commanding. "You don't hide something where people are looking," he said, gravel in his voice. "You hide it where they won't." The words cut through the dry air. Men glanced at one another. They all knew the odds. 72 hours in the desert. A child's chances dropped like stones in water. Some had already begun bracing for the inevitable, a case that would gather dust in a locked file. But Hayes refused to speak the word body. He refused to surrender the word child. He pressed his palm flat against the map. "I've seen this too many times. The obvious grids get checked. They come up empty, and hope dies. But the worst hasn't happened yet. Not if my gut's right." Morales, one of the older deputies, shook his head. "Your gut won't get us clearance, Sheriff. You're asking us to risk our badges." Hayes's jaw tightened. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather leash, frayed at the edges. His thumb brushed the loop before he tucked it away again. "I know what I'm asking. But there's a 7-year-old girl out there. Every minute we wait, the desert takes another piece of her. I don't give a damn about clearance. I care about bringing her back alive." Silence followed. A helicopter droned overhead, its shadow slicing across the ground. Hayes's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon, where gullies invisible to air searches folded into themselves. "If I were hiding something, I'd go there. Out of sight, out of mind. No one checks because they think they can't." The deputies exchanged uneasy glances. Rules mattered, but Hayes's conviction pressed heavier than protocol. That night, he tried to sleep on a narrow cot inside the trailer. The hum of generators outside kept the rest shallow, fractured. When dreams came, they dragged him backward into floodwater. He was in the canyon again, rain hammering stone, water roaring like a beast unchained. "Kaiser!" His voice shredded his throat. He saw him, dark against the current, paws thrashing, muzzle breaking the surface. Their eyes locked for a single heartbeat, amber burning through chaos. Then the river swallowed him whole. Hayes jerked awake, chest heaving, shirt soaked with sweat. For a moment, he thought the roar still filled his ears, until he realized it wasn't water he heard. It was barking. Clear, urgent, familiar. His eyes darted around the trailer. Silence. Only the thrum of machines. But he knew what he'd heard. Not a coyote. Not memory. Kaiser. His hand trembled as he pulled the leash from his pocket. He had carried it for 3 years, worn smooth like a rosary, sometimes gripping it until his knuckles whitened, as if sheer will could drag his partner back from the flood. Tonight, he pressed it against his chest, eyes closing. The leather still smelled faintly of fur and dust. "Kaiser," he whispered, half prayer, half plea. The dream replayed, but the ending had shifted. He didn't see the shepherd vanish beneath the water. He heard him, alive, sparking somewhere in the desert night. Maybe it was madness, the exhaustion of too many hours under the sun, maybe ghosts. But his gut, the same instinct that had carried him through standoffs and rescues, told him otherwise. Kaiser wasn't gone. And if Kaiser lived, he was working. He was with her. Hayes smoothed the leash flat on the table beside his cot. To others, it was relic. To him, it was tether. Proof that the bond forged in service hadn't ended in floodwater. He lay back, though sleep never returned. His doubts pressed close, but hope, thin, stubborn, burned again. It wasn't just about the girl anymore. It was redemption, a promise. "Find her, boy," he murmured into the dark. "Bring her back." At dawn, the camp looked like a war zone without glory. Tents sagging with dust, radios coughing static, men moving like shadows. But for Hayes, dawn meant decision. He stood once more at the hood of his truck, map spread beneath his hands. The red circles from the past 3 days looked like wounds across the desert, each one a promise that closed into silence. Helicopters had combed every ridge, dogs had swept every trail, and still nothing. Not a shoe, not a scrap. To most, the message was clear. The desert had claimed Lily Morgan, but Hayes refused to let the desert write her ending. His deputies gathered in a weary half-circle, coffee steaming from tin mugs. Morales cleared his throat. "Sheriff, expanding means pushing north into federal land. We need clearance, and you know how long that takes." Hayes didn't look up. His finger traced a ridge in Sector 14, a stretch few dared to cross. "We don't have time to wait. We move north today." The words hit like stones. A younger deputy blurted, "Sir, if we get caught—" Hayes's head snapped up. His weathered eyes locked onto the man. "Procedure doesn't bring back little girls. Action does." Morales stepped forward. "Sheriff, you're gambling everything. What if you're wrong?" Hayes leaned over the map, shoulders heavy, beard streaked with gray. But when he spoke, his voice carried steel. "For 30 years, I've trusted my gut. It's found killers in the dark, hikers under avalanches, children locked in places no one thought to check. Right now it tells me she's north, hiding, waiting, breathing. If I'm wrong, I'll take the fall. But if I'm right, and we don't go, then her blood's on all of us." He pulled the leash from his pocket and held it high, the frayed leather catching the pale light. His thumb brushed the brass clip, dulled with age. 3 years ago, I buried a partner I thought I'd lost. Last night, I heard him again. Call it madness, call it exhaustion, but I know it was him. Kaiser's out there. And if he's out there, he's not wandering. He's with her. Some deputies scoffed under their breath, others shifted uneasily, but no one spoke against him. Hayes slammed his palm on the map, rattling mugs and radios. "We move into Sector 14, restricted or not. That's where we'll find her. End of discussion." The younger deputy opened his mouth again, but Morales raised a hand. He studied Hayes for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "If you're wrong, Sheriff, this could cost you everything." Hayes's eyes didn't waver. "Then it's a cost I'll pay. But if I'm right, it saves a child's life. That's a price I'll take any day." One by one, shoulders squared, fatigue gave way to resolve. They had followed Hayes through storms and shootouts, through losses that had carved them hard. If he was willing to stake everything, they would stand with him. Hayes folded the map, tucked it under his arm, and turned toward the horizon. The desert stretched vast and merciless, its ridges glowing gold in early light. Somewhere out there, a girl's faint heartbeat still fought against silence. Somewhere out there, perhaps, his old partner's paws still pressed into sand. He tightened his grip on the leash. "Mount up," he ordered, voice carrying across the camp. Engines roared, radios crackled alive, boots pounded dust. The search shifted, not into safety, not into protocol, but into faith. Faith in instinct, faith in loyalty, faith in a bond between man and dog that had never failed. As Hayes climbed into his truck, the leash coiled in his hand. He whispered not for his deputies, not for the desert, but for the shepherd he still believed in. "Find her, boy. I'm coming." The desert had a way of swallowing secrets, but Victor Kane knew it never erased them completely, not if you knew how to look. Late afternoon bled fire across the Mojave, ridges jagged like teeth of shadow. Victor trudged through sand with a rifle tight against his shoulder, sweat soaking his shirt, paranoia gnawing him raw. He had tied Lily to that thorn shrub days ago, sure the sun would finish her. But now, something festered. The shrub still stood, twisted bones against the horizon. At its base lay the rope, chewed clean through, not cut, torn. Victor crouched, rage boiling in his chest. The sand told the rest, staggering child-sized prints, and beside them, broad paw tracks pressed deep, not coyotes, dogs, big ones. His breath quickened. Against all odds, she had walked away. Alive. He spat into the dust. If she reached safety, if she talked, she'd ruin him. He rose with the rope dangling like an indictment and scanned the horizon, eyes wild. "You think you can just crawl back to Mommy and Daddy? Not a chance." "I finish what I start." The trail dragged him north, prints weaving through the grit. One dog steady, deliberate, the other erratic, bounding. Victor's gut twisted. He hated dogs. Their eyes always seemed to pierce lies straight to the bone. Now two of them stood between him and control. The sun sank lower, shadows stretching long. His muscles burned, but obsession drove him harder. Every track became a hook, dragging him deeper into the ridges. Then it came. A bark. Sharp. Defiant. Victor spun, rifle raised. Out from behind stone darted a German shepherd, his dark coat streaked with dust, body weaving side to side in bursts of speed. His bark rattled across the desert like gunfire. Blitz. Victor's heart hammered. "You again," he spat, eyes narrowing. "Damn mutt." The shepherd didn't attack. He bolted in zigzags, barking louder, keeping just far enough ahead to remain visible. Taunting, leading. Victor's teeth clenched. "You're taking me to her." He broke into a sprint. Gravel skidded under his boots as he charged down the slope, rifle locked on the darting shepherd. Blitz vanished behind a ridge, reappeared with another bark, then vanished again. Always ahead, always pulling him further. Victor's lungs seared, sweat stung his eyes, but he couldn't stop. Every bark was a lure, every flash of fur a promise of revenge. "I'll shoot you first," he growled, breath ragged. "Then I'll finish her." Blitz felt danger at his back but pressed on, paws pounding, loyalty fueling every stride. Kaiser had stayed behind with Lily, guarding the girl with his scarred body. That left Blitz the decoy, the reckless lure. Youth burned in his veins, but purpose burned hotter. Victor raised the rifle, sighting down the barrel. He squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked. Dust exploded inches from Blitz's paws. The young shepherd veered hard, yelping in instinct, then barked louder, daring the man to keep coming. And Victor cursed, racked the rifle and surged forward, muscles screaming. "Clever mutt! I'll gut you!" Another shot rang, sparking against stone, shards scattering. But Blitz was already gone, a blur leaping across rock, bark echoing high and fierce. Victor followed, fury blinding him to distance, to direction, to anything but the shepherd's voice. His boots tore fresh tracks into the dust, erasing Lily's trail behind him. He was too far gone to notice. Ahead, Blitz barked once more, sharp as a flare, then vanished into the ridges. Victor chased. What he never thought about was what waited behind him. In the hollow where the thorn shrub grew, Kaiser crouched low. His body ached, his shoulder throbbed with old scars, but his eyes stayed fixed on the path. He had watched Blitz streak away, young and fast, dragging the predator with him. Now came his turn. The scent reached him first, Victor's sweat, acrid and sharp. Then the footsteps, heavy, erratic, stumbling against gravel. Kaiser pressed belly to earth, every muscle taut. He waited until the man's shadow stretched long across the rocks. Then he moved. He launched like a missile, scarred muscle exploding into motion. Victor barely had time to turn. His eyes widened, a curse ripping from his throat. The rifle jerked upward. The gun fired. Pain seared across Kaiser's shoulder, hot and blinding. But momentum carried him forward. 80 pounds of shepherd slamming into Victor's chest. The rifle flew from the man's grip, clattering against stone. They crashed to the ground in a storm of dust. Kaiser's jaws clamped down on Victor's forearm, teeth slicing through flesh and fabric. Blood filled his mouth, metallic and hot, but he bit harder, deeper. His growl vibrated like thunder through bone. Victor roared, thrashing wildly. His free hand hammered at the shepherd's skull, each blow jarring bone. But Kaiser held on, muscles locking, refusing to yield. The man's strikes grew frantic, weaker with panic. Dust smeared his face, blood spurting from his arm as Kaiser dragged him across the ground. His screams ripped against the canyon walls, curses dissolving into raw, ragged sound. Kaiser's wound burned, blood matting his fur, but instinct drowned the pain. This was never about him. It was about the girl curled in the hollow, about Blitz out there buying time. It was about the oath etched into his bones, long before floodwaters tried to bury him. Protect, defend, hold. Victor's thrashing slowed. His voice cracked into hoarse gasps. His body buckled, trembling beneath the shepherd's weight. Kaiser's growl deepened, teeth sinking tighter until the fight drained out of the man completely. Victor slumped into the dust, unconscious, blood pooling in dark stains. Kaiser staggered back, chest heaving, his own legs shaking beneath the weight of his wound. He stood over the man, jaws dripping red, eyes scanning the horizon, and then he heard it, faint, distant, but alive. Blitz's bark, defiant, triumphant. Kaiser pressed his weight against his bleeding shoulder, forcing breath through gritted teeth. He turned back toward the hollow where Lily lay hidden, her small body trembling but alive, her eyes wide and waiting. The predator had been stopped. The girl was still safe. Kaiser lowered his head, ears pricked, blood darkening his fur. For the first time in 3 years, he didn't feel like a ghost of the desert. He felt like what he had always been. A protector, a partner, a police dog. Scarred, battered, but unbroken. The desert had fallen silent, as if even the wind chose to hold its breath. Copper light bled across the rocks, stretching shadows long and thin, like memories that refuse to fade. In one of those shadows, tucked inside the shallow curve of stone, Lily Morgan lay curled on her side. Her body looked impossibly small against the vastness of the Mojave. Each breath rattled faintly in her chest, shallow and uneven. Her lips were cracked, her eyelids swollen, her arms limp in the sand. The desert pressed down from every side, whispering for her to let go. But she wasn't alone. From the ridge, Kaiser limped into the hollow. His gait was uneven, one leg dragging, his shoulder slick with blood where the bullet had torn through. Dust clung to his wounds, but he kept moving. Every step was deliberate, driven not by instinct, but by vow. He lowered himself beside her, pressing his broad chest close to hers. His muzzle brushed her cheek, a touch so gentle it seemed sacred. She stirred at the contact, lids fluttering open. Her dull blue eyes found the amber gaze above her. "Dog," she rasped, her voice little more than air. Kaiser pressed his forehead against hers, his breathing steady against her shallow wheeze. Where her body faltered, he offered rhythm. Where she shivered, he gave warmth. Moments later, Blitz bounded clumsily down the slope. Dust streaked his muzzle, his chest heaving from the chase, but his eyes burned with fierce defiance. He collapsed against Lily's legs, tail sweeping weakly in the sand. His nose nudged her ankle, a soft whine rising from his throat before he curled tightly around her. She was bracketed now between two shepherds, one scarred and bleeding, one restless and young. Their bodies formed a living barricade against the desert's silence. Her lips trembled. "Don't leave me." Kaiser lowered his muzzle until it rested against her chest, feeling the faint stutter of her heartbeat. His eyes softened. Pain roared through his shoulder, but he pressed closer. She had asked him to stay, and he would. Blitz pawed at her sleeve, whining, then lay still with his body curled along her legs. His youth, his loyalty, lent her strength. For the first time in days, perhaps since the rope had bound her to the thorn, Lily managed a faint smile. Her fingers lifted with effort and tangled weakly into Kaiser's fur. That fragile touch steadied her breathing. The shepherd closed his eyes, a ghost of a dog reborn with purpose. The desert night crept in, shadows deepening, air cooling. The two shepherds pressed tight against her, their warmth a fragile fortress. Her breaths remained fragile, but steadier now, pulled into rhythm by the lives wrapped around her. Hours passed in silence. Stars broke open above the ridges. Blitz dozed in short bursts, his ears twitching at every shift of wind. Kaiser stayed rigid, eyes scanning the hollow's mouth, muscles taut despite his wound. They did not move. They would bleed into the stone before leaving her side. Then, just before dawn, the air shifted. A faint vibration trembled through the sand. Kaiser's ears snapped forward, catching it first. The low, steady thrum of rotor blades far on the horizon. Blitz's tail swept once, weak but eager. His nose lifted, nostrils flaring. Lily stirred, her hand tightening in his fur. Her cracked lips parted. "They're coming." The thrum grew louder, joined by faint human voices carried on the wind. Calls, shouts, the bark of radios. Kaiser rose stiffly, planting himself between Lily and the hollow's mouth. Dust whipped around his legs as the helicopter's shadow crawled closer across the dunes. Blitz pressed tighter to Lily, his body trembling with exhaustion but refusing to move. She buried her face into his neck, whispering hoarsely, "Don't leave me, Blitz." He nosed her shoulder, whining softly, "I'm here." Figures appeared on the horizon, uniformed, silhouettes breaking against the dunes. Boots crunched on sand, voices lifted her name into the air. Kaiser gave a single sharp bark. The sound echoed down the ridge, commanding and clear. Rescuers froze, then angled toward it, sprinting hard. Within minutes, a small squad crested the rise above the hollow. Radios crackled, "Child located! Over here!" Dust swirled as they descended, rotor wash whipping grit across the hollow. One medic crouched low, hands out, voice calm. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now. We've got you." But Lily clung tighter to Blitz, knuckles white against his fur. Her lips trembled. "Safe." Blitz lowered his head across her chest, a living anchor. Kaiser gave a low, approving rumble, eyes locked on the strangers. The rescuers slowed, sensing that the child's trust lay not with them, but with the two battered shepherds guarding her. The medic inched closer, speaking softly. Lily's gaze darted between his face and Blitz's amber-brown eyes. Finally, she loosened her grip just enough for the rescuer to slide a hand beneath her shoulder. "She's dehydrated, hypothermic," the medic called over his shoulder. "We need to move now." The helicopter descended, blades chopping air into a roar. Medics moved fast but careful, wrapping a thermal blanket around Lily's small body. Her hand slipped from Blitz's fur, panic flashing in her eyes. Immediately the shepherd pressed his head against her chest, tail thumping once against the blanket. Kaiser stepped forward too, ignoring the blood matting his shoulder, and pressed his body close until his muzzle brushed her hand. The medic paused, glancing at the two dogs, then nodded. "Let them stay close." Together, the rescuers lifted Lily from the sand. As they carried her out of the hollow, her hand stayed tangled in Blitz's fur, Kaiser limping at her side, his amber gaze never leaving her. The desert stretched vast and merciless around them, but the hollow no longer belonged to silence. It belonged to survival. And as dawn spilled gold across the ridges, the image burned into every eye present. A child swaddled in rescue, her frail hands still clinging to the fur of two shepherds, one young, one scarred, who had refused to leave her. Sector 14 wasn't a place men went by choice. It was bad country, basalt ribs, gullies that swallowed sound, heat that clung to the lungs even at dawn. The convoy crawled in low gear, engines grumbling, tires skittering over loose stone. Dust rose behind them, thinning into a pale sky where a helicopter circled, rotor wash beating like a second heart above the desert. Deputy Daniel Hayes drove the lead truck with both hands tight at 10 and 2. A folded map lay on the dash, but he wasn't looking at it. His eyes searched the broken rock ahead, scanning shadows where mornings like to hide their truths. In his shirt pocket, an old leather leash pressed a warm crescent against his chest. He let himself feel it. "Quarter mile to the red line," Morales said over the radio, static crackling. "Tracks keep shifting. Wind's playing tricks." "Wind always plays tricks," Hayes replied. His voice surprised him with its softness. "Eyes where your feet will be." The convoy stopped at a funnel of stone where two ridges leaned like tired shoulders. Hayes killed the engine. The world opened. Cicadas, fading rotor wash, the tick of cooling metal. He stepped down, the ground's heat coming up through his boots, the ache in his knees pulsing with his heart. He adjusted his hat and listened. The desert whispered when you paid it respect. A pebble skipped somewhere distant. A thread of sound you wanted to be a voice, but feared was only wind. "Spread in twos," Hayes ordered quietly. "Slow feet. No shouting unless you've got reason." They moved like water through the rock. Radios hushed. Hayes took the center cut. Always had. The leash in his pocket felt heavier now, At a shallow draw, he found the first sign. A scuff, a smear of darker earth, then prints. Not coyote, not cat, dogs, 2 sets, one deep and deliberate, the other lighter. Restless, circling like a younger brother refused at the front of the line. Hayes crouched, setting 2 fingers into the track. Pain carried in the weight of that step. Purpose, too. He swallowed. "You're out here," he murmured, and the desert took it like a confession. Movement flickered. Morales appeared on the rise, pointing with 2 fingers. Hayes climbed, the rock warm through his gloves, his breath caught in his throat. The draw opened into a basin carved by wind, stone on 3 sides, sand in the center. There lay a man, sprawled on his back, blood pooling beneath his arm. 20 feet beyond him, at the shadow's edge, a knot of figures pressed together, too still to be anything but fragile. Hayes froze, blonde hair plastered with dust, a child's thin arm, and against her, 2 shepherds, one silvered with age, the other dark and young, lying as though their only purpose left in the world was to keep her alive. Something cracked inside Hayes, heat blooming behind his ribs. He raised a hand. No loud voices. 1 medic. The rest hold back. The young shepherd lifted his head first, eyes bright with effort, muzzle stained. He gave a warning rumble that raised the hair on Hayes's arms. The older one didn't move, only tightened his body around the girl, a wall of breath and bone. Hayes removed his hat. "Easy, boys," he said, and the word boys meant only them. The medic slid in gently. "Hey, sweetheart. Name's Carla. We've got you." She let the dog smell her hands before reaching. The girl stirred faintly, fingers twitching in the old shepherd's fur. A breath escaped her lips. "Don't leave." Blitz, the name Hayes gave the young one, pressed into her hip. The old shepherd touched her shoulder with his muzzle, steady as winter. Morales whispered from the rim, "It's the girl." The words broke loose a chorus on radios. "Sector 14, repeat, we've got her." Relief flooded the air, raw and unsteady. The medic worked carefully. "Dehydrated. Dust asthma. We're lucky. We move slow." "Lucky," Hayes echoed, though he was looking at the dogs. He knelt, knees aching, and placed his palm in the sand near the old shepherd's paw. Amber eyes met his, holding steady. No language was needed. "Carla," Hayes said, voice level. "Tell me what you need." 2 hands for the blanket, and we don't separate her from the dogs. Not until she lets us. Clear? "Clear," Hayes answered, a small smile at his mouth. "Boys, you hear that? You stay as long as she needs." The blanket slid under. The young shepherd rose shakily but stayed close. The old one shifted last, careful, carrying weight that wasn't his but wouldn't be dropped. Dust gusted through the draw, carrying the smell of blood, grit, and beneath it all, dog. The good kind, the kind that finds you when you're lost and holds back the dark. "Sir," Morales said gently from the rim, "News wants a statement." "News can wait." Hayes's eyes never left the child's face as the oxygen mask's soft hum steadied her breaths. A voice from base broke through the radio, stumbling with relief. "Confirm you have visual on the missing juvenile." "Confirmed," Hayes said. "We have her." He didn't say what else he had. Not yet. Because now, in the hush of the basin, he saw what he thought impossible. The older shepherd's muzzle silvered with dust and blood, the rise and fall of flanks scarred by survival. For 3 years, Hayes had carried the ghost of a dog in his pocket. Now the ghost breathed before him. His throat closed. "Kaiser," he whispered. The shepherd's ears twitched, his head lifted. Amber eyes found the voice. The tail swept once in the sand. Hayes stepped closer, barely breathing. "It's me, boy." "It's Hayes." For a heartbeat, the years folded back. He saw not the battered survivor, but the partner who had run canyons at his side, who had carried hikers from snow, who had curled at the foot of his bed when grief hollowed the house. "Kaiser," he said again, firmer. The dog rose, trembling, favoring his shoulder. One step, then another, before pressing his scarred forehead into Hayes's chest. The deputy dropped to his knees. His arms wrapped the dog, fierce yet careful. His hat tumbled to the sand. He buried his face in fur that smelled of dust and blood and something achingly familiar, the scent of loyalty that had never left. "You stubborn, loyal son of a gun," Hayes murmured, voice breaking. "You made it. You found her. You didn't quit." Kaiser leaned harder, a low rumble in his chest, not growl, but recognition. His tail swept steadier now, answering an old call. Deputies turned their eyes aside, giving the moment its privacy. Hayes framed the shepherd's muzzle, searching amber eyes lined with pain, but still burning with the flame he trusted. "You brought her back," he whispered. "You never stopped being mine." Tears cut hot tracks through the dust on his face. For 3 years, he had carried a leash like a gravestone. Now, it burned against his chest, proof that some bonds never break. He pressed his forehead to Kaiser's. "Welcome home, partner." The moment broke with movement. Medics lifted Lily, her hand tangled in Blitz's fur, her body fragile beneath straps and blanket. Blitz whined, trying to follow. Kaiser pressed his muzzle to her dangling hand until her fingers curled faintly. Only then did he let her go. Deputies swarmed the unconscious man nearby, Victor Kane. Blood streaked the dust beneath him. Morales's voice was hard. "Cuff him." Restraints snapped shut, cold and final. On the rocks, Laura Bennett collapsed to her knees, sobbing. "I left her," she gasped. "God forgive me, I left her." No deputy moved to silence her. Some prisons lived inside the soul. The stretcher rose, medics strapping Lily in, oxygen mask hissing. Her lips moved faintly. One word. "Dogs." Blitz pressed against her foot. Kaiser lowered his head at her shoulder. Medics exchanged looks, but did not push them back. To separate them now would be to tear the heart from her chest. Hayes watched, his weathered hand over the leash in his pocket. 2 dogs, 1 miracle, he said softly. The words carried like scripture through the basin. Deputies swallowed hard, blinking against grit and tears alike. The stretcher lifted toward the waiting helicopter. Blitz trotted beside it, battered, but refusing to break contact. Kaiser limped at the rear, injured but proud, amber eyes fixed forward. Laura reached out, weeping apologies. Lily's eyes, half open beneath the mask, stayed on the shepherd's. Hayes walked with them, his hat low, the leash pressing against his heart. For the first time in years, the desert gave something back. Hope, redemption, and the fragile thread of life held together not by law, but by loyalty. 2 shepherds had done what men could not. They had held the line where the desert swallowed light. As the helicopter blades thundered, lifting the child into the sky, Hayes tilted his face into the wind, eyes stinging. He whispered again, 2 dogs, 1 miracle. And the desert bowed in silence, honoring the truth of it. The desert had its seasons, though few outsiders noticed. A month after the rescue, the Mojave softened under spring's timid hand. Mornings cool, evenings stretching longer before surrendering to night. Out on the edge of that quiet, where pasture met cottonwoods, Daniel Hayes's ranch had become something it hadn't been in years. It had become a place of peace. The yard smelled of new grass and wet earth, the windmill creaking lazily in the distance. Against the warmth of the afternoon sun, 2 German shepherds lay sprawled on the lawn. Kaiser, older and scarred, rested his head on his paws. His healed shoulder bore only a pink seam beneath the fur, his amber eyes still carrying a steady fire, no longer haunted but settled. Beside him, Blitz dozed on his side, belly to the sun, paws twitching as he dreamed. From the porch came laughter, light, unguarded. Lily Morgan sat cross-legged, a sketchpad balanced on her knees, pencils scattered around her. Her hair had grown fuller, her cheeks rounder with health. She leaned forward, tongue poking out in concentration. "Hold still, Blitz," she giggled. The younger dog flopped onto his back, tongue lolling. "I can't draw you upside down." Blitz's tail smacked the grass. Lily laughed again, shading lines across the page. She had been fragile weeks ago, haunted by silence. But now color bloomed in her face, chatter spilling out like bells across the ranch. Kaiser lifted his head, ears flicking. He rose stiffly and padded to her side. Without hesitation, Lily set the pad aside and wrapped her arms around his neck. She buried her face in his fur, as if anchoring herself to something solid. Kaiser stood steady, watching the horizon. From the doorway, Hayes leaned against the frame, coffee mug in hand. He watched with quiet reverence, his weathered face softened by gratitude. The ranch had known ghosts. Now, with Lily's laughter and the shepherd's presence, it had taken on the shape of healing. He stepped down onto the porch. "Drawing again?" he asked gently. "Yes, sir," Lily said, bright-eyed. She held up her sketchpad. 2 shepherds, one bounding, one silvered and steady, guiding a small figure with hair blowing in the desert wind. Hayes's throat tightened. "You've got their spirit. Not everyone can capture that." "They saved me," she whispered. "I want to remember them like that. Always." Kaiser nudged her shoulder. Blitz bounded up, licking her hand until she toppled into the grass, laughing, the 2 dogs pressing against her as though guarding joy itself. Hayes slid his hand into his pocket, fingers closing around the old leather leash. Once it had been a gravestone. Now it was a reminder of second chances. Weeks passed. Lily grew stronger. Her parents, Dana and Eric, clung to her as if every breath was borrowed grace. Yet gratitude alone wasn't enough. One late night, at their kitchen table, Dana traced the rim of her coffee cup. "We can't just stop here," she whispered. "There are others, children who don't come home." Eric studied her face, sleepless lines carved deep. "What are you thinking?" "A foundation. In Lily's name. A way to help others be found before it's too late." Silence held, broken only by cicadas. Then Eric reached across, covering her hand. "Yes, let's do it." Word of Lily's survival had spread far beyond Nevada. Headlines read, "2 German shepherds guard missing girl until rescue." The story caught fire. Grit, grace, and loyalty etched in public memory. When Dana and Eric announced their vision, support poured in. Volunteers, law enforcement, families who had lost children writing letters of hope. The mission was simple: aid in the search for missing children, bridging gaps between families and police, ensuring no child vanished without every hand reaching. The question of a logo lingered until Lily walked in one afternoon with her sketchpad. She laid it on the table with solemn care. 2 shepherds sprinted across desert sands, one dark, one silvered, with faint footprints leading toward light. "Use this," she said. "It's them." Eric's throat tightened. Dana brushed her daughter's hair back. "Are you sure?" Lily nodded firmly. "They brought me home. Now they can bring others too." So it was decided. The Lily Morgan Foundation carried the shepherds as its emblem symbols of loyalty, pursuit, and hope on 4 legs. The launch event filled the county hall with families, deputies, and strangers drawn by the story. A banner stretched across the stage. The Lily Morgan Foundation, bringing them home. Dana spoke first, voice trembling, but strong. She spoke of fear, of waking to an empty bed, of 2 shepherds who refused to leave a child alone. If they could fight for her life in the desert, we can fight for every missing child. Applause rose, steady and building. Eric spoke next, lower and steadier. "This is about refusing to forget, about telling families, you are not alone. We will look. We will not give up." Then Lily stepped up, small, solemn, her knuckles white on the microphone. But her voice carried, "I was scared. I thought I'd never go home, but I wasn't alone. Kaiser and Blitz stayed. They never left. I want every kid to have someone who never leaves." The hall fell silent, every eye on her. She lifted her sketchpad, showing the shepherds bounding forward. "This is the promise. They will run until you're safe, and we will too." The applause shook the rafters. In that moment, the foundation became more than an organization. It became a covenant. That evening, Hayes sat on his porch, cicadas humming, the leash warm in his pocket. The shepherds sprawled in the yard, Kaiser's head resting against Blitz's flank. Through the open window came the sound of Lily's laughter. Life, he realized, hadn't erased scars. It had written survival through them. And now those scars were proof, not of pain alone, but of a story that refused to end in silence. The weeks turned, spring deepening into summer. One afternoon, Lily arrived at the ranch carrying a tin box. "I brought them something special," she announced. The gate squeaked. Blitz bounded across the yard first, his dark coat flashing in the sun, tail wagging furiously. Kaiser followed with slower dignity, gait marked by his old wound, but steady as ever. Lily dropped to her knees, opening the tin. Inside lay star and bone-shaped treats, still warm from the oven. "I made them myself," she said proudly. "Mom says they're safe. I tested one." She giggled at her own confession. Blitz snatched a star, crunching loudly. Kaiser approached with calm restraint, amber eyes fixed on Lily before taking his share with gentle precision. "There you go," she whispered, stroking his silvered fur. "You're still my hero, Kaiser." The old shepherd lowered his head, pressing his muzzle against her chest. Blitz pawed impatiently at her knee, earning another laugh as she handed him another treat. She wrapped her arms around both until they toppled her gently into the grass, joy spilling across the pasture. From the porch, Hayes watched, his hat low, coffee cooling in his hands. For a man who had carried loss like a second skin, the sight felt like a benediction. A child once swallowed by the desert, now kneeling between two guardians who had refused to leave her. Lily leaned close to Kaiser again, her voice steady, despite tears brimming. "You didn't let me die alone," she whispered. "Now it's my turn to bring others home." Kaiser blinked slowly, his tail sweeping once in quiet affirmation. Blitz nudged her side, jealous, making her laugh again as she hugged them both tighter. The sun slanted low, painting the pasture gold, cottonwoods etched in amber light. Shadows stretched long across the field. Hayes let the moment settle deep in his chest, a reminder that not every story ended in grief. The world beyond still carried darkness. Children would still go missing, families still grieve. But here, in this circle of earth, light had won. Love endured. Healing had taken root. Lily leaned back in the grass, cheeks flushed, Blitz licking her face, Kaiser resting steady at her side. The empty tin lay in the grass, crumbs scattered like stars. Above them, the sky streaked with pink and violet. The girl, the old shepherd, and the young one sat framed in fading light, a trinity of survival and loyalty. The desert had tried to claim them, but the desert had lost. Sometimes the most powerful reminders of love don't come from words, but from the quiet loyalty of a dog lying at our side. Stories like Lily's remind us that German shepherds, and really all dogs, carry a kind of faithfulness that can change lives. They protect us, heal us, and in their own way, teach us what it means to truly belong to one another. If you've ever felt that bond with your own dog, you know it's something worth nurturing. I recently came across a resource that helps deepen that connection, offering gentle insights into training, communication, and simply understanding our companions a little better. I'll leave the link here in case you'd like to explore it for yourself. It's not a pitch, just something I found meaningful and thought you might too. Take it if you wish, leave it if you don't. What matters most is cherishing the loyalty right in front of you, the wagging tail, the steady eyes, the love that never falters. Because in the end, it's not just about raising a good dog. It's about recognizing the miracle of the bond we're lucky enough to share.